Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the workshop on learner-led discussion in the ESOL classroom. Just a brief introduction before we get you involved in a few tasks. It was a really small project, so just focusing on two classes, an intermediate level class and an E2, so elementary class. Part-time provision in Tower Hamlets, accredited classes. Our interest in discussion grew out of rereading reports into effective ESOL practice, and particularly an NRDC report on turning talk into work. And we're particularly interested in this idea of learners speaking from within, and when they're talking about something they're engaged in, that their communicative ability increases and it really pushes them. We're also interested as well in Albach's work on participatory curriculum. So the idea that learners' topics that they bring to the classroom, or that topics that are revealed throughout classroom interaction, that we can use those actually in our classes. So I think it's fair to say that learner-led discussion is nothing new in the ESOL classroom, but we wanted to see if and how it worked in the current context, with the background of exams, limited guided learning hours, and increasing pressure to get through students through exams due to funding pressures. So with this in mind, we conducted 3 focus groups, 2 with students and 1 with tutors. And we asked them about their experiences of exams, teaching and being in exam classes. And we also asked them about the topics and activities they find particularly engaging. And the difference between the tutors' views of exams and the students were quite stark. So the students, gave them confidence, immigration, citizenship, further job, voluntary level work. So it was very much about progression and officialdom, if you like. The tutors' views was a fairly heated discussion. One tutor said useless, craziness, load of rubbish. And I think that was possibly related to a couple of tasks mentioned here. But tutors were managing to, it was clear from the discussion, they were managing to, in some way, cope with the tension of exam tasks and meeting learners' needs. And this was reflected in the students' views, who on the whole were very happy with the way they were being taught. What came across from the tutors and the students was this focus on discussion and learner talk, and how this was always something that was engaging. So we decided to really refine our research questions and focus on the role of learner-led discussion. So our final questions were, how can discussion develop learners' language? How can discussion enable and motivate learners to speak from within? And how did tutors manage these instances?
So just very briefly, this is the methodology that we use to undertake our project. So we're very concerned in understanding the classroom from the perspective of the teachers and the learners. So we were using an ethnographic approach, so we recording and transcribing learner talk. We were keeping reflective journals after every session. And we've been teaching the learners for 5 months already, so we had relationships with them, they were familiar with each other. When we were transcribing the data, I don't know if you were at Richard's talk this morning, he was talking about conversation analysis, so it's really very fine-grained view of learner talk, looking at interruptions, at learners talking over each other, at pauses. So we really wanted to understand what was taking place in these discussions. And our journals that we kept, we kind of had the action research model in mind, where we were taking an action, reflecting on it and planning further action. So we kept it in this structured way so we could follow how our thoughts developed throughout the research project. And then when we came to, let's get out of it. Oh look, sorry, I'm not very good at this. When we came to analyse the data, we were looking at it at a line by line level, looking at the categories that were coming out in each line, comparing them to make larger thematic categories that came into our research findings. So obviously this is what we're going to talk about, but before we do, we've put some questions on your table that we were thinking about when we were analysing or came out of our data. If you can have a look, I think are most people ESOL practitioners? Some people? Okay, so if if you're able to, with the people on your table, just have a look at these questions in just a few minutes, have a little chat. Maybe if this side of the room, so my right, if you want to have a look at the questions 1 and 2, and over here, if you're happy to have a quick look at 3 and 4, just a few minutes if you've got any thoughts on it, and then we'll talk together. Don't worry if you can't say anything. I'm going to know soon.
Discussion's always one of those things that's hard. It's got to get the right keep it going. Because it's got to be interesting. But then there's got to be enough for people to be some groups, especially groups that they're going up what they already know as a common sort of thing, and where you can perhaps put in, but I think it's really important to something that you've got moving into new enterprise. It just
I used to do it quite a lot because I had the same thoughts about this, and a lot of these things quite current affecting the learners' advice. And obviously in terms of things that are there and
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, just if we could get a couple of feedback on the first 2 questions from this table. Were there any thoughts that you had, any ideas or anything you wanted to say about the first 2 questions?
In terms of the discussion, what we find often is that students, rather than listening to each other and each other's point of view, sort of say what they want to say, and so there's no discussions, basically. They just state their views without listening to what someone else has said and responding to other people's views.
So would you say that actual interaction needs to be taught or practiced, or?
Yes, possibly. They'd be able to learn how to listen, how to sort of listen with understanding. In order to be able to respond, you have to listen to what the other person has said. So you can't have a discussion without that.
Thank you. Anything else from this group on questions 3 and 4? Anything that sprang to mind that you would, or even the first 2 questions?
3 and 4, we thought that possibly the barriers could be that learners could have different accents and struggle to understand each other. Also, sometimes males and females, especially if they come from Asian backgrounds, do not like to work together, and sometimes even people from different countries do not like to work together and like to stick to their own countries.
I wasn't so sure what is meant by the critical discussion. What is meant by that critical discussion?
Well, is engaging with each other. For example, critical discussions in my classroom are thinking about life in the UK. What do you think is good? What is bad? Is analysing a topic. Really.
Is it about expressing views? It's
expressing views, talking about your experiences together, and having an opinion about it, which I think because we're teaching adults, even though they might not have the language, they've got the experiences and they will have thoughts, so it's really helping them to be able to engage critically with maybe emerging linguistic resources. I think what's going on here.
There's quite a big difference between entry 1 and entry 2, so I don't think.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, an emerging entry one learner as an established and consolidated entry learner as well.
Yes. Yeah, so we were quite lucky because I worked with an entry 2 group and Kate was working with the level 1 group, so our findings were coming up with different things as well.
And going back to that definition of discussion, I think that's really interesting. I think that Breyer's, Cook and Winstanley work that was done, was it last year or the year before, they were saying that discussion is a meaningful exchange between 3 learners, usually on a social or political topic. They were quite clear that's what it was for them, and I feel that in our research project we probably didn't use that as such a strict definition, and that actually it was often, well, in the level 1 class maybe more, it was a question of tuning in to what they were talking about and developing that topic, rather than so much engineering, not engineering, but sort of structuring a debate in a more formal.
Yeah, because we looked at it from a linguistic background point of view as well, and we were talking about things like, do they have the language? You know how you need chunks of language, don't you? Those adverbial phrases and stuff that you need for, like, in my opinion, or I agree with, or those kind of, so that could have come into, apart from the basic vocabulary could be a barrier, but also those chunks that you need to give your opinion.
Yeah, and I think going back a bit to Richard's talk this morning, we were trying to work with what was coming out, and we've got a couple of transcripts now, so you could maybe look at it more from if you're interested, more of a linguistic point of view.
Yeah. So some of this stuff we are actually going to talk about now in our findings. I keep doing this. Never mind. Okay. So from the entry 2 classroom, on the questions, if you turn it over, you have actually got a transcript from the class. So hopefully, if you're an ESOL teacher, it's probably quite obvious that one of these was just a general discussion and one of these was an exam in preparation for an ESOL entry 2 speaking and listening exam. And I think they're quite different kinds of discussions going on. There's different language being used, there's different ways that they are interacting. And I think as a teacher, for us, it was the first year that we were in the adults girls budget, where we had to get learners to pass an exam in so many hours, and obviously discussion is part of the speaking exam. And I found this really interesting because it made me realise that there are 2 different discussions going on here, and I think there is a danger in exam classes that you can focus, just in case, but this is the exam discussion, you can focus on this kind of discussion work, which I feel isn't really a genuine discussion. There's very little interaction. Like in D here, it's kind of, he knows that in the exam he has to ask a question to get a mark. So somebody started to speak and they're like, oh, if I don't ask a question, I'm not going to pass the exam. He doesn't care what's coming next. Whereas here, there's genuine, like, G is helping E to develop his turn a little bit more. They're actually engaged in meaning making here. They're talking, comparing housing in the UK and in other countries, and they're genuinely interested. They're pushing each other to develop language. We've got the vocabulary here is more advanced. We've got things like congest, construction, which maybe for an entry 2 learner you wouldn't, I don't know, looking at the core curriculum, you wouldn't expect them to be using this kind of language. Obviously this one here, the form is a lot clearer, so we've got lots of like and ing, so grammatically this looks a lot prettier, I think, but it's not really, if you go back to spoken language and a little bit what Richard was saying this morning, spoken language doesn't usually look like this, it's more broken. And so, I don't know, I think what I've taken away from this is that discussion is very useful in the language classroom, but we need to be very clear what kind of discussions we want to have with our learners. That it is good to focus on form with learners and they need to pass an exam, but I don't think this model should dominate, and that when they're involved in a kind of genuine focusing on meaning rather than form, then a lot of interest in language is coming from the learners, and Kate is going to talk about this a little bit more. Just one more thing. Just a little bit about supporting learners who are probably very early or in the early stages of learning English and having critical discussions, so talking about their lives, what their opinions, their views. A couple of things that you've already mentioned. Oh, that's the next one. Sorry. Yeah. Is that Kate will expand on this, is actually listening to the learners' language that they're producing and framing discussions in language which is coming directly from the learners. So, for example, I set up one discussion about the difficult barriers to work in the UK, I think was the title, and to entry to learners' barriers, it doesn't mean anything, whereas in another instance I overheard learners saying, oh, I came to the UK because I wanted a better life. So I used this quote as a prompt for a discussion over 4 sessions, and when the language had come directly from the learners, it was much more engaged. There were less barriers for them to overcome. And then there's quite obvious things that you can do. You're providing them with vocabulary, you use photos, and also I think if you actually give them a structured task, they're able to have a discussion, so it's kind of lightening the cognitive and linguistic mode as much as possible, which helps them to really focus on expressing their opinions and their meanings.
Sorry, I'll just do a couple of minutes on a little bit with the level 1 class. So this was probably 5 sessions into adopting a more discussion-led approach, and learners had been talking about the schoolgirls from Bethnal Green who'd gone to Syria, and I decided that was picked up in one of the voice recordings, so I decided to use that topic and see, I was panicking about language at this stage and I wanted to do language, but actually they were much more concerned about discussion here. So in the back of my mind I was worried about the exams, and I knew I had to get them through conditionals and relative clauses, but I tried to do that and it fell flat. So we just reviewed the story again, and I had a few prompts. Is there anything you want to talk about this story? Could we have prevented it? Opening up discussion around this, and pop the voice recorder in the groups. And this, I've got a little bit of the extracts of what we picked up on. And we're limited for time, but if you're interested, maybe a minute in your groups. So the context is they're discussing why these girls might have gone and what could have been done to prevent them from going. Okay. So maybe think about learner interaction, how are they interacting? Think about the language that's being used by the students, and how would you focus on that language in the next lesson? Is there anything you pick up on? And maybe also think about the topics they're talking about, because it moves from the Bethnal Green Syria story into something else. Okay. So I'll just give you just on your tables, it won't, not too long, just a short extract. If there's anything you want, I know that we haven't got enough time to explore that, but if there's anything you have noticed or want to feedback, please feel free to do that now. If not, we'll probably move forward just quickly. So, actually you can go back, sorry. Yeah, so I picked up real exchange of information, this interpersonal nature, checking, repetition, something that Richard was talking about earlier. Lots of signalling that they're listening and making meaning together, especially the extracts about Pakistan. And the topics parenting, social media, teenagers and isms, I think comes a lot, radicalism, extremism, whatever you want to take from that. Next one.
Oh, I'm going back.
Don't worry. And that's some of the language that I pulled out and that we used in subsequent lessons. And also good just to build on the good examples they're using, not just to focus on what needs maybe refining, but use the good language and involve that in your scheme of work as well.
Okay, and these are just our overall findings. You can have a look.
So would you record a free session, or would you just start getting to the practice of listening and noting down?
A bit of a mixture of both, because one time one of the learners switched the recorder off, and some of the most amazing things happened when it wasn't being recorded. Because a lot of the topics were topics I would never have brought to the classroom. And some of the things learners said off voice recorder were amazing. But I had them around every lesson, and I said to them that they knew how to operate them. But I formally transcribed 3 discussions. One was 13 minutes, and I possibly should have transcribed more, but I found that a bit of a challenge. I think it developed a bit more into actually learners uncovering the scheme themselves, both in terms of language and topics, which I think was interesting. Thank you. If you've got any questions, obviously.
Well, that's brilliant. We could listen for ages. Thank you very much.